Just us.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Mark Ostrainer is on the train this morning, joined by the homie, the real traveler of wrestling, and the best-looking spokesperson in America for Nike, Grant Turner. How you doing, man?
Doing great, brother.
You were in Colorado Springs last weekend. Probably really was the focus of USA Wrestling. Interesting they did it in the Springs, at a high school. I know you saw Gary and all those guys out there. I guess let's just start with that, like just overall impressions. I don't know where you want to start. You want to start with Greco? You want to start with the women's matches, the men's freestyle? What was the biggest impression to you?
Well, I think so. For instance, having it in Colorado Springs, just in the WCAP entries, probably saved the WCAP like $100,000 in travel and in. Once again, the majority of the Greco was WCAP. Some of the women's freestyle, and then majority of the people that were in these matches were WCAP athletes. So having it in the Springs was a very big draw for them. So it saved that organization a lot of money, having it there. Having it at the high school, it was a perfect setup for the amount of athletes and the amount of matches that were occurring. So, basically focused attention, 2 mats. One side of the gym was all spectators. The other side was like half bleachers for the athletes. And, it was kind of good to separate out things. Yeah. So it was, as far as like that whole thing, it was set up perfectly. Great. They had a small gym for a warm-up area, proper locker rooms. Everything looked like it should for that level of a competition. So you don't get to see that maybe like with the entirety of maybe some of the posts and things like that. So it was really cool. Well done. As far as like the matches were concerned, the amount of talent that was at this tournament, even though it was a small amount of entries, there was a lot of great wrestling that went on. And once again, with it only being on 2 mats, you could focus on like one or the other and basically like flip back and forth, right? So I think probably some of the matches that were some of the ones that like stand out to me is how great Nashawn Garrett looked. I think that was one of my highlights. And then the Wyatt Hendrickson, Mason Paris semifinal was just absolutely bananas. As far as, on the women's side, there were some really great matches between like, I think right off the top of my head, I think when Jakar was in the semifinals against Amanda Martinez, it was like a pretty good match. And then all of a sudden Jakar pins her like in a.
She was down 2-0. She was down 2-0 at the break, I think.
Yeah. Emma Bruntel looked really good against Glade in the finals. And then to just speak to the depth of the USA Wrestling category at 76 kilos, there are some really good, talented wrestlers in that field. With Diamond and Precious Bell and Skylar and Adeline and Yelena and and Welker. All of those girls are UWW ranking series medalists. They're very good, internationally as well as domestically. So just a really, really cool showcase, if it will, for all 3 styles. And we'll get into the results here a little bit for all of those. And
let's start with the ladies, and let's start at the top weight. Like you said, to me, Adeline Gray's improvement from 4 weeks earlier, 3-4 weeks earlier at the US Open. I'm going to make an obvious statement. None of us know what it's like. None of us men know what it's like to have delivered a baby, much less twins, and how long it takes your body to recover just as a normal person, much less a world-class athlete. And so you can imagine that's a very steep recovery. Like every day you're probably getting, the increments are bigger than just a normal process. So she's so smart, obviously, super savvy, great tactics, got the coach of the year in her corner in Nate Engel, but she looked really, really good. I mean, she was down 3-0 in that semi and then, laced her up, and she and Vito are sort of the people you can't get taken down in the middle of the mat on, or it could conceivably be over. And then the finals, complete turnaround from, where she was down 8-0 at the U.S. Open and then got the 3, one caution ones, step outs, push outs, whatever you want to call them, to just dominating and tech falling with offensive points. So you've been around women's wrestling a long time. You've been around Adeline for a long time. She's probably the most under-celebrated multiple-time world champion we have, and a lot of that has to do with just the exposure of women's wrestling versus men's. But to me, coming back like that, where she looked mortal last month, and now she looks back to be looking like Superwoman again. Where would you stack that up? Just like, I don't know, like a whole historical thing, just how impressed were you by that, I guess?
Well, once again, I think to everyone's credit, Adeline has been carrying the mantle for women's wrestling for a very, very, very long time, and has kind of, and I mean, once again, not to, downplay anything else. Adeline's kind of been a captain of that women's team because she's made so many consecutive teams. She's medaled at a lot of different, world championships, world champion herself. I think, with Helen having kind of her match against, in Rio, getting her Olympic gold, so there's like a lot of, play up on the American side. But I think Adeline coming back the way that she has after, basically having kids and basically being a mom now and coming back and storming back the way that she has, is a credit to her, and it's a credit to her determination to be back on the world team and go and try to make another run for Paris. So I'm really excited for that Final X match between Blades and her, knowing how much Adeline has increased her basically her presence there. So really looking forward to that match. Once again, we're going to get at least 2 of them. So we're going to get to see two matches out of those girls. So my tip of the cap to Adeline for her performance and basically just asserting herself back into the fold.
Yeah, for sure. So Bruntel wins 68, moves up, and pretty dominant performance. She has great Twitter posts. She was on the pod on Matt Chat a long time ago, but like how banged up her face is, through various tournaments. Her frontline head-hands defense is clearly good. So she looked great. She bumped up a weight essentially for this because of how stuff worked, which we're going to get into an interesting observation on the men's freestyle side of things. But she'll now take on Forrest Molinari in Final X. And then the other rumor tied to this is that with Mensah Stock being gone at that weight at 68, maybe Allure, who's at the in-between weight right now, with Blades and Gray and all those other hammers you just talked about at 76, maybe Allure goes down to 68 for this quad, since it's basically almost over. Probably not fun, but maybe doable. And so then you got, her and Forrest and some other hammers down there at 68. So Brummel was super impressive to me, really good in position, real stingy. Is that kind of how you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, Glade has done very well at that weight, and she's a kind of a staple in that realm. Solon Piercy did really well as well, getting third at this weight, basically only losing to Glade. Once again, the great equalizer in that finals match is that leg lace. So, Emma was able to achieve that and then basically roll her up and keep her in bounds the entire time. So getting the tech out of that. Really, really tough weight class and really happy for Emma to, bump up and then be able to now vie for a world team position.
Yep. Jen Page goes to 659 from 62. and looked really good. So she'll take on Michaela Beck. It's cool to see like Mark McKnight and Varner in her corner, not like, they just sent the B team coaches or something. That you've got an Olympic champion and somebody heavily involved with Nittany Lion, in her corner. And then the last women's winner was Jakara at 55. So she was an interesting story because she sat out the U.S. Open, had the opportunity, obviously, to wrestle in it, and it looked, I think, looked better in the final than she did in the semi. Frankly, I don't know if she was in danger of losing the semi, but when you're down at the break, you're down at the break. Clearly came back, like you said, her leg attacks looked really good, and now she'll take on Alicia Hauk. So if you're looking for these Final X matchups, that's on themat.com. You can see all of them. And our buddies over at Fantasy Grade are actually going to have Final X contests where you can pick the winners in 2 or 3 and stuff like that. So I'm sure we'll do that and put a wing bet on it, if nothing else. So that'll be fun. All right, so men's freestyle. Let's start at the bottom, 61 kilos. So one of the things you mentioned, GT, in the opening was the size of the gym. I think that's super important, actually. Like, if you think 1,000 people are going to be somewhere, don't stick them in a 5,000 seat arena, right? And
right.
2 mats, like that's the biggest problem with the NCAAs, like the first session, right? Second session, like you're looking at mat 2, and then there's a ooh and a boom on mat 8. And by the time you look over, it's gone. We don't have replays when you're in there live. So the other thing you mentioned is, since the brackets were so small, there's very few warm-up matches. So Austin DeSanto's first match was Nishan Garrett because there were 7 guys in the weight. So he's the 1 seed. He'd wrestle the 8. There is no 8, so he gets a bye. And let's just start with that match. So Garrett gets a takedown. DeSanto's fighting the hands. They caution in 1, put him back down. He gets a gut. They caution, or maybe 1 or 2 guts, caution in 1, put him back down again. He gets another. He basically guts him out. But basically, it's a takedown, 3 guts, and 2 caution in 1s. Depending on which side of the aisle you're on, you're like, hey, that shouldn't have happened, or that's the rule. If they would call that all the time, people would stop doing that, and they're trying to promote scoring. So just your thought on that rule first, and then we'll get into Nashan's performance, because it's pretty freaking awesome.
Well, I think the biggest thing when it comes to, I would say, any of the caution in parterre is, once again, you got to be able to do a good job of kind of defending the lock, but not necessarily grabbing for the lock or continuing to open when you're asked to open, when you're ready to be open. Like, it's not necessarily command as, hey, open right now, but you have to like kind of play that game with the official and yourself, and not necessarily give up position when giving it up. So it's there for a reason. I think it's definitely a rule that needs to be in effect. I do like to have more caution than just giving it up all the time. Like, once again, kind of having some of giving it attention. All right, caution in 1. Very similar to like interlocking fingers or hands to the face. Things like that where you've been warned. All right, now I'm going to give up a point. Or, like you're really truly stopping them from doing something in parterre. Usually in Greco, you see it a lot more where it's like a caution in 2. Whereas
right.
Like, you're actually like, you're actually doing it so that you can't get turned. You can't do that, so on and so forth. So for that rule, once again, either side of the aisle in that match, you could say, hey, don't call it, or hey, don't be in a position to be called, try to, whatever it is.
I think there's a lot of where you're on top and you're really good, so I'm going to do this until the referee says something. And then a lot of times the referee will go, okay, hey, break that, stop. I do it, but then they don't give you 15 more seconds, give or take. Like, if you don't get something tight the next 4 or 5, they bring us back up. And so essentially I snuck you. Like, I got one in on you where I basically defended your attacks illegally. And so this call was the complete opposite direction. This call was, hey, don't do that. gave him plenty of time, did it again, and then cautioned and won it. So I would say this: Louis Baker is one of the best referees in America. Guy spends a lot of time at the craft to be as good as he can be. And a lot of these guys are getting instructions. We talked about this after the U.S. Open. They're supposed to be calling it the way it's going to be called at the World Championships so that our athletes are ready. Now, there's another call, which I think we can just agree on and go past it and stay focused on the wrestling. But like James Green pointed out, like if you put me on my back and I bridge and I slide out of bounds, like now that's a caution. Like, where am I supposed to go? Like, I can only go in the directions my feet will push. If I could somehow, like, let's say that like my butt was near the edge and I could literally just plant my heels and drag myself out of bounds without my back skidding, I would probably do that. I'd also probably not be on my back because I'd be superhuman strong, So I think there has to be some common sense on that, right? Like, that's, where am I supposed to go?
Well, yeah, I think, and once again, I have to keep a very G-rated opinion of, like what's the rules like for NBA or NFL? Like, you can't comment on the officiating. Like, you can't, like, hopefully, like, Gary doesn't fine me for discussing officiating in the U.S.
Yeah.
The one thing I'll say about some of the, I would say, the rules when it comes to that, especially like, very high level thinking people like James Green, who's a developmental coach of USA Wrestling, he has a very optic lens of like, hey, I'm trying to coach the kids to be prepared for the rules in order to be successful at the Olympic level. And I think taking note of what is an athlete supposed to do in those situations, I don't think there's anything you can do to not get called.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, like,
it's just a call.
I mean, like, hey, don't get on your back. Like, hey, just don't be there. Once again, I think that there's a lot to discuss in some of the rules and applications of the rules, especially within the U.S. versus internationally. So, there was a lot of those kind of situations that have occurred over the U.S. Open trials tournament, and you'll see it again in Final X for sure. Right. So prepare yourselves. Have a pillow that you can punch into, or like, or something that you want to be able to like take your frustrations off.
Ron and Jan are coming over to watch Final X. I know you'll be there, but they're coming over to the crib. So I'm sure that's going to happen. And Jan's going to be like, David, why does that person have to go back down?
Oh yeah. So, no, try to explain it. That's exactly what you have to be able to try to do.
All right. So basically, Garrett texts DeSanto. Then on the other side, Gross loses to Dayton. Dayton beat Joe Colon, I think, first round.
Yep.
In a good match.
And
then Nashon basically took Dayton apart in the finals. The score was misleading because, Dayton was going for something late and Nashon forward him. So I think it went from 8-4 to 12-4. So, it wasn't a 12-4 match, but wasn't a very 8-4 match either. I think Nashon was up 8-1. So you're there. I have my impressions of it, but you go ahead and go first.
Well, once again, I think if you just look at the box score, you're not going to get the full aspect of like, 12-4, like domination. It's like, it was a lot closer than a lot of people would think from the score. But to Nashon's credit, when he needed to be able to score or be able to, extend the lead, he was able to. And, a dominant performance against AD, looked really good doing that. And then, of course, to go up against the world silver medalist in Dayton Fix, who knows that, like, this is the one match that he has to be able to do in order to get to Final X, basically got, a big 4-point takedown off a blast double that kind of separated out the score, which then Dayton couldn't get back into the match. After that, was trying basically everything he possibly could to, basically close the gap. But with Nashon's distance, it was a little bit more cautious of a match than normal, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Nashon did a great job in that match. And once again, I think there was a tweet or something like that where it looked at Nashon's results basically in this quad, it was like, 0-1 at trials, or, did not compete, did not qualify. And then all of a sudden, tech, going to Final X, go best 2 out of 3 and potentially be the world team member in 2023.
Well, a couple of things that my observations. Number one is he looks way better on top than like he, has in a long time. He was kind of sneaky with those tilts in college, but mainly he was known for double legs and scoring in space and take you down, cut you loose kind of guy. Like that's, how he won his NCAA title in the finals, especially. Second thing is this. He's so good at distance control. He's that opposite leg lead. You circle into his lead leg, you're probably going to get put on a poster. He's really, really fundamentally sound with that back knee drop. He gets his level change faster than most people. If you want to teach a person how to level change without screwing their footwork up, watch him. Like him and JB are the two guys that do it as good as anybody. Dayton actually stopped the first double, brought him up. I think this, and as a guy that's not tall, I say this from a position of I get how you feel when I say this about Dayton. It's hard for him to control distance. Like, and the guys that we see that beat him are guys that are tall. They're the guys that give him trouble, like Vito, RBY, which we'll get into, Nashon. So distance control is a big thing. Like we talk about it a lot in MMA. Like, if you and me had a fist fight and you can keep me on the end of your jab, like I got to walk into it. I got to get into the pocket. There's a range where only you can hit me and I can't hit you. And it's the same thing in wrestling where you can get to my legs and I can't get to yours. You can snap my head and I can't really get to yours. But they got to get Dayton on leg attacks because he's down 7 and he's trying to get push outs and get an over under, inside out step, reaps, body lock positions. Nashon's super sneaky with that wizard kick on the edge too. And I mean, that's going to serve him well. Like he knows the rule. You can put your hand on the mat, not your head. And, he's scored a couple points that way. And those aren't just points. Those are his point versus, like, if you do that to me, it's +1 for you instead of +1 for me. So that's a 2-point swing. You get a couple of those, and it's a lot different. Like, instead of 8-4, if it's 7-5 with 30 seconds left, that's a big difference. So plus Nashon had the 4, so he's essentially up 5 unless Dayton can get a 4 of his own. So, I think that's a summary of it. Seth Gross didn't have his best tournament, lost on the backside. But, love how that guy wrestles and competes and just his attitude on life. So, I mean, the U.S. is in good hands, and that's a non-Olympic weight. So it's crazy when you look at that is they're all going to go up or down. Like, I think Nashon's going to have to go up. I don't see any way he can go down. I think same thing with Seth Gross. I don't know what DeSanto's going to do. I cannot imagine him making 125.4, especially with Spencer over there. And then I think Dayton will go down. And that's where being short helps because now you can actually make that lower weight class. So the next weight, 92, kind of what we thought. I think Zahid just super skilled. I think maybe the biggest surprise of the tournament was Tanner Sloan beat Nate Jackson 9-9. That match was not really 9-9. Like he was way ahead. Nate chipped away and got like the last point with like 2 seconds left, but Sloan knew he had criteria. So, I mean, Tanner Sloan was like up 8-1 or something like that.
Yep.
But here's a super ironic thing here, GT. If Zahid beats Mike Mock, he's on the world team. He could place at 92. I think it's going to be hard because in the world, these guys are full-blown 92s, and he's actually a small 86. But if he were to place, he's now in the semis of the Olympic trials. If David Taylor beats Aaron Brooks doesn't even have a spot anywhere, and he beat Zahid.
Right.
What do we think about that?
Well, I think that's the thing that is perplexing to when you don't become the guy at the specific weight and you can move around. Because with Zahid being at 86 and then deciding to go to 92, like would Zahid trade being in Final X already at 86, or would he prefer to be at 92? potentially with being the guy and potentially being a medalist or whatever it is at 92 kilos, going into the world championships and representing the United States for the first time?
Well, I think the short answer is if they said odds, Zahid would be a decided underdog against David Taylor. Okay, like if he had beaten Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
I'll bet you Zahid's the betting favorite against Mike Mock. And if he's not, I would definitely bet he's less of an underdog. I think if you had asked 10 people that know wrestling and said how many of them think he can beat David Taylor, it's 1 or 2. And I think if it's Mike Mock, it's somewhere between 3 and 7. So, I mean, he's in a better position. I'm actually fascinated by Brooks Taylor, and we make picks next week. I may dark horse that and go Brooks. That'll be next week's talk. But it's just an interesting sidebar of how that came out. Zahid looked so good, man. I mean, you were there live. He's way smaller than those guys, but he was really good at sort of picking and choosing his spots and not getting in those heavy head pulls where he got worn out. At least that's how I saw it. How did you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it, right? For that hand fight, like you can get tired pretty quick. And, once again, it's hard to determine that while you're watching it, or like how like you feel like when you're actually like taking that beating or taking that, basically those, that pressure of how heavy your hands are. Biggest probably the one thing that you can probably point to, and one of the examples that I always have is like anybody that's wrestled like Alex Derringer and how he hangs on your head, and it's like, you need to go see a chiropractor immediately following the match. Yeah. Just stuff like that, where it's like, hey, his hands are that heavy, his pulling down on you, that wears on you quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, we'll wait till after Final X because there may not be anything to talk about. So we'll wait on that. 125, Captain America, Wyatt Hendrickson. I'm going to tell you this. When this guy's done with college, if he goes, I mean, no offense, like the Air Force has been great for him. I mean, he'll be in a position where he doesn't have to go serve, like he'll be wrestling as part of his fulfilling his service duty. But if he goes to like an RTC that's got training partners for him, feels like the sky is the limit for this dude. Like he doesn't know some ABCs, but he can do some XYZs that you can't even teach. If you watch one match from that tournament, I would argue it's him and Paris semi. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that would be a phenomenal match to watch. Just two very, very large athletes doing little kid moves.
I thought Paris, I'll tell you this, the brick that Chiarella and KJ threw was brilliant for 2 reasons. Number one, they won the challenge. But number two, Paris was broke. Like the last 2, he went over easy. His ribs were hurting. They said he might have dislocated. I mean, I don't know how you dislocate and finish a match, but maybe he's just way tougher than normal people. Maybe that's possible. But the crazy thing was at the end of the match, for people that didn't see it, like Paris is winning on criteria basically. And there's like 6 seconds on the restart. And it's almost like he's not ready. And Hendrickson shoots and gets him to the edge, almost gets it.
Right.
And so then you're watching that. And like, I picked Paris ahead of time to win the whole thing. And then I'm like, well, he ain't going to be Gwiz now because Gwiz just rolled up Dom, and Gwiz looked better and didn't get banged up, didn't really expend nearly as much energy. And those guys found a way. And then Paris makes Final X. When's the last time Gwiz hasn't been in Final X? I mean, I'm not like, it's rhetorical. I'm not asking you to name the date, but it's been a long time, right?
A long time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think we expect Paris to be competitive with Gable. I mean, we've seen it on folk style. We saw it at freestyle, but really good performance for him. I mean, I don't know what adjustments you make. I think the only way to beat Gable is somehow to get on top of him and gut wrench him 4 times or leg lace him because, we don't know if he's any good down there. So, well,
the last time that Gable was probably in parterre was the Olympic finals.
And he got turned.
And he got turned by Gano. But once again, we're talking about
the best guys in the world.
One of the top heavyweights in the world for the past 6 years.
Right. Yeah. So, what were your thoughts on Greco just overall?
Very, 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 I would say competitive is probably the best word that I wanted to basically state here. There was a lot of kind of, I want to say upsets, but not necessarily upsets, but there was a lot of like, just probably guys that like haven't had those wins before that ended up getting wins in this tournament. I think probably some of them that probably stick out the most would be Xavier Johnson beating Sammy Jones at 63 in the finals. That's that one kind of, it was maybe surprising to some people, not to say, that Xavier's not going to do very well there. I think probably how good Rayvon Perkins looked, because he's been battling injuries quite a bit. So like he wrestled all the way back for third. I would say probably more shocking in the Greco world is basically Provisor losing 2-1 in the finals to Epps, who is the 6th seed in the men's tournament. So big upset there.
So just interrupt real quick. Epps went 3-2-1. He beat 3-2-1, right?
Yeah, so he had a tremendous tournament.
Yeah.
I think big shout out to Bronigal with his run at 87. Once again, also the 2 seed, but Tim Young was in Final X last year against Alan Vera. Stefanowicz was our Olympian at 87. That ended up getting upset by Carlson in the semis. So once again, big shout out to the Illinois RTC and putting that athlete into the finals there. Boykin ended up like hurting his elbow against Lout pretty extensively in that match, but ended up wrestling back, and then he'll have an opportunity, which we'll get into here when it comes to
let's talk about those. So, I mean, all the things are lined up now. I think that the interesting thing about Greco is there were some upsets. If you didn't watch any of this, they did Greco on one day because all 10 weights were being contested because we had no medalists, and then women were 4 and men's freestyle were 3. So basically they made that a one-day tournament. So, okay, so one of the things now for those watching on June 10, 12:30 Eastern, there will be the true third place matches. And so then at 1 o'clock will be Final X. Final X is going to be 3 mats, 1 for each style. I think that's better in terms of watching it, like knowing what you want to see. Like if like for a guy like you, if Ben Provisor was in this, your Ben Provisor is must-watch television. So when his weight class comes up, that's the match you're going to be focused on. So, Flo will have the split screen where you can see all 3. So the 19 matches, though, here they are. It's just I'm reading it straight off of Team USA, Matt.com. Women's freestyle 50, Lampy versus Golston. 53, Chavez versus Taylor. 57, Hedrick versus Martinez. 59, Nelson versus Arena, 72, Cassiope versus Hayes. 76, Diamond Guilford, Kylie Welker. To me, that last match is kind of the 2 bookend matches. Lampy Golston and Guilford Welker are kind of the 2 brand name matches. And then Rose Cassiope being so young. Is that kind of how you see that, GT, on the women's side?
Yeah, I think, Felicity Taylor was in Final X last year against Dom. So, like, kind of making sure that she gets back on kind of the national team piece there. Maya Nelson, making sure that she's, basically healthy and ready to go. She was a little bit, hurt in the past. So I want to make sure that she feels good and ready to go and, make national team again. But yeah, I think the highlight are the bookends, the basically the guys that have been around for a very long time. Lampy and Golston and Diamond and Kylie are kind of on their way up. So, and also extremely talented, as Diamond was the world team member last year. So really, really cool matches there to watch.
Right. Greco, 6 matches. Miranda Kuntz at 60. Jones Gregerson, 63. Walksmith Hooker at 72. Jacobson Ravon, 77. Provisor Stanghill, 82. Longendijk Metz at 130. I think the two sort of must-watch matches anytime Ben Provisor wrestles. And then I think Ravon is super high ceiling. And then Sammy Jones has had he's a very entertaining guy, got upset at this past weekend. But the other thing to point out for people is these matches are important. They get you invited to certain camps. They get certain things paid for. You go on a stipend, like all these different things. And that's always important. But I remember like in 2016, I'm pretty close with Dieringer. And at the time, Dieringer, like he came back through and got on that third place spot. And like that was really meaningful to him in terms of what that allows him to do. I mean, more of these athletes now are getting things paid for, but if you're not really heavily sponsored, it's really important. Plus, you're obviously the second alternate if anything goofy were to happen. And, who knows, right?
Right.
Men's freestyle, bunch of matches here. So, Suriano Camacho, a match we've never seen before. Dayton Fix, Austin DeSanto. Joey McKenna Kolodzik, Sammy Sasso Pantaleo, Chenzo O'Toole, Dieringer McFadden, Colin Moore Jackson. So, I mean, these are like, I'm probably going to be glued to almost all of these. I mean, Pantaleo lost at the U.S. Open and won 8 matches to come back through and take third, which is super meaningful in terms of just mental toughness. I mean, you had to do that to even be in this position. Chenzo and O'Toole, kind of different age groups there. Ringer McFadden, that's probably going to be a barn burner, 2 different styles. Dayton DeSanto, you would think Dayton's got a pretty clear edge, right? He's beaten him every time in folk style, but one of the ways he beat him was riding him. You could certainly argue Dayton's a better freestyler than he is a folk styler. And you could argue DeSanto's a better folk styler than he is a freestyler at this point in his life. So all the arrows point to Dayton. So, those are all really relevant matches. And plus a lot of, that's the advantage of men's collegiate wrestling. These guys all have storylines, like Kolodzik was the guy that got hosed during the pandemic year, came out of red shirt, and then the season got shut down. He's an easy guy to root for, that kind of stuff. So anyway, a couple of loose ends we want to talk about here. So number 1, James Raleigh left Wisconsin, goes in the portal, ends up over at Purdue, big-time recruit coming out of high school. So I think he redshirted last year, so he still got all his eligibility. This next one, close to home, GT. Younger Bastida, Sam Schuyler graduated. He's staying on as a graduate assistant. Younger Bastida is going from 97 to 285. They said he'll probably wrestle in the 230s, give or take. I'll give you my take, and you tell. He might be one of the 2 or 3 best guys in the country on his feet at that weight. He was at 97. The same problem was like he struggled on bottom and really couldn't ride anybody. It feels like that problem gets worse at 285. Like if you can't ride a 200-pound guy, like I'll just make a very easy analogy. If you can't ride Rocky Elam, I think riding Zach Elam would be harder. So, but maybe his speed is a bigger advantage at heavyweight than it was at 197. I mean, I guess that's obviously what Iowa State's banking on. Plus, they know their lineup a lot better than us, and maybe they feel like, hey, he's our best option at heavyweight, and we have a guy at 97 that we're comfortable with.
Yep.
How do you think you think he's a factor to podium at 285?
Well, I think so. At 285, we lose Paris, correct?
We lose number 1 and number 8. Kirkfleet, Hendrickson, Cassiope, Davison, Elam, and Schultz are back. Slobakowski is back, and 3 round of 16 guys are back.
Once again, it depends on how big I think Younger can get. And if he's going to stay kind of in that mid-range, kind of like in that 220, 230 range, or even like in the 210 teen range, I think he can still be very effective there, but I gotta see him wrestle at heavyweight in order to like really, because I haven't really seen too many athletes hit inside trips at heavyweight. And that's one of Younger's really good attributes, is going upper body and being able to like do inside trips or throws or some of those techniques where you're there. Younger definitely has the height for it. But I'd like to see him fill out, because I think Younger's going to be a 97 kg guy anyways.
Yeah, which is 213 for people that don't know, give or take. Yeah. So, all right. Let's give a shout out to Don Bradley, 15th, I think it was 15th U.S. Open medal. Then he goes and wins the Pans, then, wrestles in the World Team Trials and got his master's degree. That guy had a pretty good May and April, pretty good 4-week run there. And one of the genuinely nice guys in wrestling, and a Missouri guy. So shout out to Dom. Great job, great work, great month. Probably he did more in 4 weeks than most people do all year. RBY to the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. I don't think the surprise is that he went to Nittany Lion. I think the surprise is that he's wrestling. And now he may be like a Bo Nickel Nittany Lion, where he's there and he's hanging around and he's working out, but he's also getting ready for MMA because they also have American Top Team out there. I don't think money is a problem out there in terms of keeping him there. And, he may have a lot of flexibility like Bo. He's an interesting guy, though, like in that mix at 61. I feel like he's in there with almost all those guys except Vito. To me, Vito's like sort of head and shoulders above just because his prowess on the mat. Like the way to beat Vito is to never get taken down. It's pretty freaking hard to do, especially 2 out of 3. Now, the way Nashon's going to have to do it is get the first takedown and gut him out. That score could be 18-16. They both get on top of each other once, so, I expect fireworks, that would, but, so there's the RBY result, decision. So Hayden Hidley, Obi Blanc moving quickly over there. So we got some, I guess, misinformation, GT. Like we were told that the Roger Kish hire was they were going to keep the Oklahoma University assistant coaches on staff. Since then, Hayes has said goodbye. Heflin is gone. They've brought in Marsden. Everybody that we're talking to says they're going to bring in Cam Sikora, who are the 2 assistants at North Dakota State. Talked to Hardell Moore yesterday. He said he spoke to Tion, and Tion's told he's safe. He's staying. I think, that's good for that program. You have somebody local legend recruiting there, obviously a great coach, and he's tied to Buchanan. But basically, NDSU has moved their staff down there, for the most part, except for Obi. Basically, it's an Obi for Tion trade. And then the Hidley move makes a ton of sense for Obi, right? Because now Caliendo and Franek have a guy right in their wheelhouse to work out with, which if anybody was getting itchy to leave, that kind of scratches that itch, right?
Yep.
So, smart moves on both sides there. I guess the last thing we can talk about is Angelo Ferrari. He is announcing, we're recording this on May 25. He's making his announcement on May 31st. It's down to 3 schools: Rutgers, let me do an alphabetical order: Iowa, Rutgers, Virginia Tech. I'll tell you what I think. Where do you think he goes?
I would just say Iowa probably has the edge just based off of Anthony being there. But once again, that's brothers go to different schools. It's not necessarily a guarantee. So
I'll be shocked if he doesn't go to Iowa, because I think this whole Cody Chittum nightmare is for nothing if they don't get Angelo and AJ. I think that's the pot they put their chips in. Hey, Anthony comes, and there's all sorts of different rumors on whether Anthony was sort of just signed himself, like if he got money. There's interesting questions about Chittum, like how could he just leave for Iowa? He never signed a scholarship. which is weird. He was there training there for a year. I talked to Ostrander yesterday about it, and he was like, listen, Chittum didn't want to leave. He was in tears when he left. I've seen several guys post on their social media how even though Chittum left, they're still Cody Chittum fans for life, and they're Iowa guys. So I don't think he left with bad blood with the kids. I just think it was like, hey, it's him or me, and they didn't, and I get that as a coach. You're like, hey, I'm the coach. I decide who's here and who's not. And, but everybody's allowed to make their decision in sort of this era of free agency, especially when you haven't signed a letter and you haven't started your clock yet. Mark and I were talking off air yesterday about how hard it is to figure out who's got how many years left. And it's crazy. Like, these guys can take multiple Olympic years and everything else, and injury red shirts and regular red shirts and all this other stuff. So, but anyway, so next week, GT will be, I think we'll probably start previewing Final X. We got 2 weeks to do that. I think the week also U20s and U23s are next weekend. The National Wrestling Hall of Fame induction is next weekend. The Beat the Street Chicago Gala is next weekend. One thing that never stops is people planning stuff on weekends in wrestling. So also, I didn't know if we were going to get to this, but shout out to all the people that went to the Central Regional this weekend. That I heard that tournament ended at 1 a.m. or something crazy. So hopefully the people that went there survived, and hopefully they get the brackets and everything worked out. So it's a little more timely. It is an interesting conversation. I talked to a guy that I highly respect in wrestling, and he said they should consider going back to like Little League situation where they wrestle certain weight classes in like 2 or 3 hours. They said they think they're losing people to wrestling because when they first start and they don't love it, they don't want to sit there all day. Like a soccer game is, an hour, hour and a half. A basketball game is an hour and a half. And, to wrestle 4 wrestling matches could take 7 hours. So interesting thought. I think we're programmed to just, that's normal. And also we love wrestling, so we don't really care who's wrestling from that time, most of it. So anything else before we sign off, boss?
Looking forward to Final X coming up. Good luck to all the athletes before getting to the U20 and U23 championships. Really looking forward to seeing who comes out of that, U23 team. That'll be very cool to see. Yeah, really looking forward to it.
Those are the superstars of today and tomorrow. Those are the superstars. I would guess that at least a handful of kids that come out of that tournament are going to be heavily in the mix for 2028 for the Olympic team, because we've got a lot of people right now that are favored to make the Olympic team that realistically are not going to probably go another cycle. I think at least 2 or 3 of the weights, you could see them being done after 24. So, keep an eye on those weight classes, on those people. And USA Wrestling will put out a big preview on that, as will all the other great people in the wrestling community on the media side. So for GT, for Mark, who's the CEO of the Train Company, I'm David. Thank you guys for watching and listening. See you all next week.